So specifically for filings, Houston, Texas, far and away the most amount of eviction filings we're seeing in the country. Baltimore, Maryland is significantly less, but still a very strong second. And that's an important thing I want to highlight on the next slide. But for now, keep going down the list. The next thing that really stood out to me on this analysis is Bronx, Brooklyn, and New York City. Three of the 10 top markets where we see eviction filings exist in a state where Vince highlighted operators can't actually use them in their decision within that state. They can in other locations, but there's a significant disconnect in how many filings and what we'll see on the next slide, judgments, are in locations where the operators can't even factor them into their decision. That's a huge blind spot. And I think it's still worth the argument, as we always advocate for the industry, of what is important in the decision and what is very relevant objective data for these decisions that operators need to rely on to mitigate their risks. If we can jump to the next slide. So as I mentioned, Houston was number one filings far and away. Baltimore was a distant second, but a strong second. However, for filings that go to judgment, that's different. They're almost neck and neck. So in Baltimore, Maryland, if it's filed, it's very often going to become a judgment. But in Houston, if it's filed, about 7 out of 10 are actually going to go to judgment. Arizona, on the other hand, almost exactly consistent. If it is filed, it will most likely go to judgment. Um, these trends are, great to note because it is a control and it's a client end user decision on how long do you want to see filings as an indicator of whether or not somebody was recently evicted, why were they evicted. Um, there's a control to that. It can be up to a year, it can be beyond that, it can be as short as a couple of months, but being aware of whether or not where your property is located, if there's a filing, if there's not a judgment, and what the expectation should be about the risk that that creates for the property, I think is good to note here. If we can go to the next slide, I want to jump over to criminal data. So over a 6-month period analyzing over 2 million applicants, we're seeing that there's a lot of criminal mobility after conviction. So the county that the individual was convicted in, where we may find a record where the property that they're applying for is located, over half the time or about half the time, we're seeing that they were actually convicted in a completely different county. And I suppose that's not too surprising that if you've had a significant conviction, you want a fresh start, you move to a new place. But for risk mitigation, that's an extremely important data point to be aware of is if you're doing a search, especially a county level search only in the county that they're applying for, there's about a 50% chance that you may miss something on that individual.